For 30 years, Johnny Carson was the best late-night TV host. He had to deal with all kinds of people behind that cute smile and quick wit. Not all of them made him laugh or think. Some made him clench his teeth and count the minutes. People say that Johnny Carson couldn't stand these 8 guests. Bob Hope is at the top of this list. Many people remember Johnny Carson and Bob Hope as 2 of the funniest people ever. But behind the scenes, they were not friends. Carson liked having casual, unplanned talks with his guests. He liked it when people could talk about things that were real and happening at the time. But Bob Hope wasn't that kind of guest. Andrew Nichols, who used to be Carson's head writer, said that Hope rested on this team of writers. He said that every line had been thought out ahead of time. Bob always had a plan. Nichols once said, Johnny liked guests who were real people and let them talk freely. With Bob, there wasn't much to say. Carson got less and less excited about having Hope on the show over time. Hope looked stiff and forced when she went out. He would only answer questions that everyone decided on ahead of time. Hope would get lost and give the wrong answer if Carson asked something out of order. After a particularly dull interview in the 1980s, Carson is said to have told his staff, "If I ever get like that, just shoot me." Their awkward relationship wasn't just in the studio. There was a quiet competition off stage. Hope thought of himself as the older person and thought Carson needed help because he was older. Both guys were asked to perform at Ronald Reagan's first inauguration as president. Hope went up to Carson with some joke ideas, even though Carson was in a better position. He handed Hope a few pages and said, "Here, Johnny, these might work for you." After Hope left, Carson became very angry. He smiled and said, "Thanks, Bob, that's nice of you, but I've got everything ready." "Do you really believe that?" "He believes I need his jokes." NBC kept putting Hope in the spotlight, even though they had different ideas. Carson took over a studio that was built for Hope when he moved The Tonight Show to California. Even so, Hope had extra rights. Whenever he wanted to sell something, he could go on the show. Carson didn't like it. I couldn't say no to Hope, though. What made things worse for Carson's guests was Hope's strict style. When we talk about artists who made their own rules, we come to a man who could break any rule he came across. Frank Sinatra was a star who made every room feel like his own stage. People flocked to watch The Tonight Show when Old Blue Eyes walked on. The man was so attractive that people couldn't get enough of him. But Johnny Carson found out what everyone else in Hollywood already knew behind the scenes. Frank Sinatra did more than sing My Way. He lived it and sang it. No matter where he went, Sinatra was always in charge. People who worked in hotels, movies, and records did everything they could to make him happy. He thought Carson would treat him the same way. What was the matter? Johnny thought of The Tonight Show as his own kingdom and wasn't used to giving up power. The most well-known case took place during a live show. Carson was in the middle of his speech and getting into a groove with the crowd when Frank Sinatra walked out on stage. There was nothing from the organizers to warn or cue them. He walked out of the room and cut Johnny off in the middle of a joke. Everyone in the crowd went crazy. They loved how Sinatra would show up out of the blue and surprise them. What about Carson? He kept smiling and acting like he was fine, but he was really mad inside. In Vegas, that kind of power move might have worked, but this was Carson's show. And then there were the needs. Sinatra traveled with a group of people that made rock stars look small. There were last-minute changes to the style of the show, different seating arrangements, specific lighting needs, and a lot more. Every time Sinatra went on tour, it was a big deal. Carson, who liked order and control, found it tiring. Do not air. Carson had a lot of respect for Sinatra's ability. He should have been able to, right? But if he was a guest, he would have to give up control of his own show, which the man who had spent decades becoming the perfect host never liked. If Sinatra caused chaos with his fame, our next guest would cause a different kind of trouble, one that would make Carson wriggle in his seat for very different reasons. Harry Belafonte. Harry Belafonte was someone Johnny Carson had a lot of respect for. The man had 3 weaknesses. He is a singer, actor, and educator. People couldn't take their eyes off of him on TV, and his dedication to civil rights was truly inspiring. What Carson often didn't know was what to do when Belafonte went on The Tonight Show. A lot of the guests on the show had one simple goal: keep the crowd interested. They would talk about their new project, tell funny stories, and maybe even sing a song. It would be light and airy, great for late-night TV. But Belafonte was thinking about more important things. He went on The Tonight Show to talk about justice for the poor, civil rights, and the issues America is facing. People in the studio would quiet down when Belafonte talked about unfair treatment, the struggles of African Americans, or his work with different humanitarian causes. That wasn't because no one was interested, it was because his words didn't fit with the show's normal tone. People in America read The Tonight Show before bed, a spot where folks could relax after a long day. It didn't always work to have heavy social comments, no matter how important it was. Carson was in a situation where he couldn't get out of it. If you make a joke, he'll look indifferent. If you change the subject, he'll look rude. So he wouldn't go along with it. Instead, he would think about it, ask deep questions when he could, and try to get back to more positive ground. When talking to Belafonte, though, things were always taken seriously. The awkwardness wasn't about them. The men looked up to each other, but they had different goals. Belafonte wanted to use his fame to bring about change and make people aware of things. Carson wished everyone a good night's sleep. These two tasks couldn't always work together well. Carson was mentally challenged by Belafonte, but our next guest made a more direct threat that really scared the usually calm host. He is Wayne Newton, the performer in Las Vegas who caused the fight backstage. Wayne Newton was nothing but a running joke for Johnny Carson for years. Newton's loud voice, his sequin clothes that sparkled, and his over-the-top Vegas character. All of this was great stuff for Carson's quick wit. Johnny would say funny things about Mr. Las Vegas every night, and the crowd loved it. It looked like it wasn't dangerous. After all, Carson made fun of everyone in show business at some point. Wayne Newton didn't laugh, though. Most famous people knew that Carson's jokes were just part of the late-night game. But Newton took them personally. Carson was making him look like a joke instead of the serious entertainer he thought he was, which hurt his image. Newton had enough of the jokes because they hurt him. People who were there say Newton just showed up at Carson's office one day, without warning. When he walked in, it was clear that the jokes had to end. The exact words said will stay secret, but everyone who knew both men knew it wasn't a friendly conversation. Newton could be scary when he wanted to be, even though he was quiet on stage. Carson was allegedly shaken by the fight because he was used to being in charge. He had made fun of lawmakers, movie stars, and everyone else for decades, but no one had ever swarmed into his office and told him to stop. The jokes about Wayne Newton stopped almost right away, but the damage had already been done. Newton kept going on The Tonight Show every once in a while, but the atmosphere had changed totally. No longer was there easy conversation. Instead, there were forced smiles and awkward small talk. Carson may have been polite on camera, but behind the scenes, he never forgot or forgiven that argument. If Newton caused stress by getting into fights, our next guest caused chaos by being really hard to predict. Hello, my name is Shelley Winters. Many of Johnny Carson's guests made him laugh or think, but Shelley Winters made him get ready for impact. You could almost see Carson's shoulders tense up every time she walked onto the Tonight Show stage, because anything could happen with Shelley. Winters was an actress who won an Academy Award and had a lot of acting skills. There was no telling what she would do, though. She would talk over Carson in the middle of a sentence, go off on tangents, and ignore his efforts to steer the conversation. In general, she treated the interview like her own therapy session. Carson liked it when people talked to each other. He knew how to lead conversations, make jokes, and make his friends look good. Winters didn't do what anyone else did, though. She was a mess in designer clothes, and Carson never knew when she would start crying over her latest bad relationship, or tell a sweet story about her youth. Snow White's most famous act was when she took off her shoe during a taping and gave it to Carson right there. There was no background or reason. People in the room laughed because they thought it was planned, but Carson's face showed what went on. Standing there with a woman's high heel in his hands, he had no idea what to do with it. It was even worse that Winters seemed to really think she was just being funny. She would talk over the other guests, cut them off, and generally make what should have been a smooth talk show part into a one-woman show, which wasn't always a good one. Carson was too polite to show his anger on camera, but the people who worked on the show knew what was really going on. It wasn't going to be an interview when Shelley Winters was booked. It was going to test how long you could last. My next guest was different from Winters in that they were hard to predict, which caused chaos. Something that made Carson feel completely out of place. It was none other than Fred Rogers, the late-night TV host who made being kind seem weird. People might be surprised by this one. Fred Rogers, better known as Mr. Rogers, was one of the most loved TV characters in the United States. He taught kids for many years how to be kind, understand, and care about others. Even though the world often praised the opposite, he was kind, thoughtful, and truly caring. Things got strange for him when he sat down next to Johnny Carson. Being kind became awkward. Carson was very good at being funny, sarcastic, and teasing people for fun. Most of the time, his friends were ready to share jokes, tell funny stories, and have light conversation that would make great TV. Rogers wasn't there to entertain, though. He wanted to talk about how he felt, how he could help kids, and how he could make the world a better place. That's lovely, but it wasn't very exciting to watch late at night. Carson was in a situation where he couldn't do anything. He was able to joke around with other guests, but not with Rogers. He would have looked mean if he did that. He couldn't make fun of or tease him without coming off as mean for picking on America's favorite neighbor. He would sit there and nicely nod, ask sincere questions, and try to match Rogers' calm energy. But it never really worked. Rogers wasn't being nice when he laughed. He didn't do what actors do where they scratch each other's backs. The way he spoke slowly, carefully, and with a seriousness that was great for kids' TV, but seemed strangely out of place in Carson's fast-paced world. It wasn't a disaster, but the conversations were awkward. Two good men from very different backgrounds are trying to connect, but aren't quite able to. Carson had a lot of respect for Rogers, but having him on the show was like trying to make jokes at a meditation camp. It just didn't feel right. Rogers made people feel uncomfortable with his gentle earnestness. Our next guest, on the other hand, caused a different kind of tension. The kind you get when you put too much stock in yourself. You got it right if you said Charlton H. Charlton is a famous actor who took every talk like a lesson in history. He was a star in the movies, Plains of the Apes, Ben-Hur, and The Ten Commandments. The man had played major roles in some of the most famous movies ever made. He walked onto the Tonight Show stage with the righteous air of someone who had played Moses and Michelangelo on stage. The trouble was that he never stopped being those people. Carson was used to seeing famous people who could laugh at themselves and were fun and silly even when they were promoting important projects. But H was on all the time in a certain way. It seemed like he was talking to the Roman Senate instead of a late-night TV crowd. He was formal and serious. He would start talking about a movie and then go into great depth about how the story fits into history. If you ask him about working with other artists, he will teach you a lot about how to be a good performer. Everything was heavy. It was important in every way. There was an emotional weight to everything that worked well in theaters, but didn't feel right on late-night TV. Carson liked the flow and pace of the things he said. It was important to him that the guests could easily switch between serious and funny. But with H, every subject seemed to need a long emotional speech. There was no humor, no small talk, and no easy laugh. As H's work went on and he became more involved in politics and fighting for gun rights, the interviews got even harder. He liked to make things fun and light, but H had strong views and wasn't afraid to share them. This put Carson in the awkward position of having to either argue about politics or try to change the subject. Even though it wasn't exploding, the stress was clear. Two giants with very different styles try to make TV magic, but never quite get it right. Carson kept things polite, but it was clear that it was harder for him than normal to keep the conversation going. When we talk about guests who brought the wrong vibe to the show, our last post is about someone who made Carson feel like he was being challenged for his throne. His name is Chevy Chase. Chevy Chase was the star of comedy in the mid-1970s. He helped make Saturday Night Live happen. His sarcastic sense of humor was cutting edge, and he was in a lot of hit movies. He was young, smart, and sure of himself, maybe too sure of themselves. From the start, when Chase went on The Tonight Show, something didn't seem right. Most comics who went on Carson's show were polite and even thankful. In the end, a show with Johnny could make or break a career. But Chase seemed to think that by showing up, he was being nice to Carson. He was very good at making his guests look good. He set up their jokes, laughed at their stories, and made sure that everyone looked good in general. But the normal way things worked didn't work with Chase. Chase didn't seem to want to follow Carson's lead. Instead, he seemed more interested in showing off his own wit, often by making fun of Carson. When they talked to each other, there was a race going on that made everyone feel awkward. Most of the guests were happy for Carson to be the show's star, but Chase seemed to think he could do the job even better. He might not have been completely wrong either. He was smart, skilled, and had great timing. That wasn't the point, though. There was more stress because there were rumors in the business that Chase wanted to work in late-night TV. Maybe he didn't really want Carson's job, but Carson could tell because he had that feeling. There was a sense of competition when someone on your show could be looking at your chair while you were sitting in it, which made real talk very hard. Chase's looks were always fine at first glance. The two men were too serious to let their personal feelings get in the way of the show. But people who knew Carson well could tell something was wrong. The slightly forced smile, the faster than usual pace, and the slight sense of relief when the part was over. It was like balancing on a tight rope for the man who had spent decades making tough talks look easy. Chevy Chase was on the show, technically a success but very tiring for everyone. That's it, folks. Johnny Carson was very good at what he did, but even experts can only do so much. There was something interesting about the fact that most of these guests were smart, successful, and probably great in other situations, but late-night TV is its own art form, and not everyone could get into the flow that made The Tonight Show work. Carson was great at making everything look easy, even when he had friends that made his job very hard. The tough guests probably made Carson a better host in the end. They made him change, come up with new ways to deal with tough situations, and keep a professional attitude even when he wanted to scream and run out of the studio. They were the sand in Carson's career that helped make it the pearl that it is today.